10 years. Daniel Harper had convinced himself that some people were meant to remain memories. He had learned to accept that certain moments in life were beautiful, precisely because they did not last. Every morning, he unlocked the doors of his small American diner before sunrise, turned on the lights, started the coffee machines, and listened to the familiar sounds of plates and cups filling the quiet room. The diner had once belonged to his father, and after his father's death, Daniel had taken over the business. He had spent years turning it into a warm, welcoming place where regular customers knew him by name. Yet there was one customer he had never been able to forget. Her name was Emily Parker, and 10 years earlier, she had walked into his diner during the hardest period of his life. She had been 24 then, with long blonde hair, a gentle smile, and a habit of ordering the same breakfast every time she visited. 2 scrambled eggs, crispy toast, strawberry jam, and a cup of coffee with exactly 2 sugars. Daniel had remembered every detail. Back then, Daniel had been 27 and struggling to keep the diner alive. His father had recently passed away, leaving him with debts and responsibilities he had never expected to carry alone. Most days, Daniel worked from early morning until late at night. He rarely had time to think about himself. Then Emily began appearing every Tuesday and Thursday morning around 8:30. She always chose the same corner table near the window. She would place her purse on the chair beside her, smile at Daniel, and say, "The usual, please." At first, Daniel had treated her like every other customer. But after several visits, he began noticing the little things. Emily always read a paperback while waiting for breakfast. She always removed the sugar packet before, pouring the second spoonful into her coffee. And whenever she laughed, she covered her mouth with her hand as though she were embarrassed by how happy she sounded. Daniel never told her how much he enjoyed seeing her. He was afraid of crossing a line between owner and customer. Emily, however, seemed to enjoy their small conversations. Sometimes she stayed for nearly an hour after finishing breakfast. They talked about books, music, small towns, dreams, and the strange direction life could take. Daniel eventually learned that Emily had recently finished college and was preparing to move to another city for a new job. She was nervous about leaving everything familiar behind. Daniel encouraged her, telling her that sometimes the biggest changes in life were the ones that led people somewhere better. Emily smiled and asked, "And what about you? Do you ever dream about leaving this place?" Daniel looked around the diner and laughed. "This place is my family." Emily looked at him for a moment and said softly, "Maybe one day you'll build a family of your own." That sentence stayed with Daniel for years. One rainy Thursday morning, Emily arrived looking unusually sad. She sat at her usual table but did not open her book. Daniel immediately noticed. He brought her coffee before she asked and placed her usual breakfast in front of her. Emily looked up and smiled faintly. "You remembered?" Daniel smiled. "You always order the same thing." Emily laughed quietly. Then she told him that she had received confirmation about her new job. She would be leaving town in 2 days. Daniel felt something inside him drop, but he kept his expression calm. He congratulated her and told her she would do well. Emily looked at him and asked, "Will you miss me?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say yes. Instead, he said, "The diner will be quieter without you." Emily smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. She reached into her purse and took out a small folded piece of paper. "Maybe you'll hear from me someday," she said. Daniel wanted to ask her to stay. He wanted to tell her that she had become more than a customer. But fear stopped him. He had spent years worrying about the diner, bills, responsibilities, and survival. He could not imagine asking someone to share that uncertain life with him, so he simply watched her walk away that morning. 2 days later, Emily never came back. Daniel kept expecting her to return. A week passed. Then a month. Eventually, years passed. He kept the little corner table near the window because it had always been her favorite. Sometimes new customers asked why he never moved the table. Daniel would simply say, "Some things belong where they are." He never opened the folded piece of paper she had given him. It remained inside an old wooden box in his office. He was afraid that whatever Emily had written would make him regret the words he had never spoken. 10 years passed. Daniel was now 37. His hair had become slightly darker at the sides, and the diner had grown busier. He had renovated the interior, added more tables, and built a reputation for serving the best breakfast in town. Yet every morning, without thinking, he still remembered Emily's order. He never served it to anyone else exactly the same way. 2 scrambled eggs, crispy toast, strawberry jam, coffee with 2 sugars. Then one autumn morning, just after opening, the bell above the diner door rang. Daniel looked up from the counter. A woman stepped inside. She wore a simple navy blue floral dress beneath a light jacket. Her long blonde hair fell naturally around her shoulders. She looked older than the woman he remembered, but something about her eyes was unmistakable. Daniel froze. The woman slowly looked around the diner. Then her eyes stopped on him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, she smiled. "Hi, Daniel." His heart began beating faster. He knew that voice. "Emily?" She nodded. Daniel stared at her as though he were looking at someone who had walked out of a photograph and into his life. "You came back," he whispered. Emily smiled gently. "I told myself I would." Daniel did not know what to say. 10 years of questions suddenly filled his mind. Where had she been? Why had she never returned? Was she married? Did she have children? Had she thought about him? Emily walked toward the counter and looked at him with a warm expression. Then she said the words that made Daniel's entire world stop. "You still remember my order, don't you?" Daniel smiled. Without asking anything, he turned toward the kitchen. 2 scrambled eggs, he said. "Crispy toast, strawberry jam." Emily laughed softly. "And coffee with 2 sugars." Daniel looked back at her. "I never forgot." Emily's smile faded slightly, replaced by an emotion he could not quite understand. "Then maybe," she whispered, "we should finally talk about why I disappeared." Daniel stood completely still. For 10 years he had wondered whether he had been forgotten. Now the woman he had never forgotten was sitting at her old table. And this time he was not going to let her walk away without hearing everything she had never said. Emily sat at the same corner table, where she had spent countless mornings 10 years earlier. The diner looked different now, but somehow the table felt exactly the same. Daniel placed her breakfast in front of her with careful attention. The eggs were scrambled just the way she liked them. The toast was crispy. The strawberry jam sat beside the plate, and the coffee contained exactly 2 sugars. Emily stared at the meal for several seconds before looking up at Daniel. "You really remembered everything." Daniel smiled. "Some memories don't disappear just because time passes." Emily lowered her eyes. She seemed nervous. Daniel sat across from her, and for the first time in 10 years, they were no longer separated by distance or unanswered questions. Emily slowly explained what had happened after she left. Her new job had taken her to another state. But within months, her life had become complicated. Her mother had become seriously ill, and Emily had returned home to take care of her. The years that followed were filled with hospitals, work, responsibilities, and family problems. She had thought about Daniel many times. But every time she considered returning, she felt embarrassed. She had left without saying what she truly felt. She had been afraid that Daniel had moved on and that coming back would only reopen an old wound. Daniel listened quietly. He admitted that he had spent years wondering whether he had done something wrong. Emily shook her head. "You did nothing wrong." "I was afraid." Daniel asked the question he had carried for a decade. "Then why didn't you write?" Emily took a deep breath. "I did." Daniel looked surprised. She told him that she had written several letters over the years, but she had never sent them. She had written about her mother, her job, her life, and most importantly, about him. She had kept every letter in a box because she could never decide whether sending them would be selfish. Daniel smiled sadly. "I wish you had sent even one." Emily looked at him. "I wish I had too." For a while, they sat in silence. The diner continued operating around them. Customers laughed, plates clattered, and the coffee machine hissed. Yet Daniel barely noticed any of it. He was focused entirely on the woman sitting across from him. She looked familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. 10 years had changed them both, but the connection between them had somehow survived. Emily finally reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. Daniel recognized it immediately. It was the same kind of envelope she had given him 10 years earlier. "What's that?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Something I should have given you a long time ago." Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph of the two of them from the diner. Daniel stared at it in surprise. He did not remember anyone taking the picture. Emily explained that a friend had taken it during one of her final visits. She had kept it all these years. On the back of the photograph were several handwritten words. "For the man who always remembered." Daniel's eyes became emotional. He looked at Emily and asked, "Did you love me back then?" Emily smiled sadly. "Yes." Daniel took a breath. "Why didn't you say anything?" Emily answered, "Because I was 24 and scared. You were carrying a whole business on your shoulders, and I thought you needed someone who could make your life easier. Not more complicated." Daniel laughed softly. "You never would have made my life harder." Emily looked at him and said, "I know that now." Then Daniel told her his own truth. He had loved her too. He had waited for her to return for months, then years. Eventually, he stopped waiting, but he never stopped remembering. He had dated once or twice, but nothing had felt the same. He had built his diner, helped his community, and created a comfortable life. Yet there had always been a small, empty space inside him. Emily looked around the diner and said, "You built something beautiful." Daniel smiled. "I had a good reason to keep going." Emily looked at him. "Was that reason me?" Daniel laughed. "Maybe part of it." They spent the entire afternoon talking. They discovered how much they had both changed. Emily had become a successful graphic designer and had eventually returned to the town because she wanted to be closer to her family. Daniel had expanded the diner and turned it into a beloved local restaurant. They talked about everything they had missed, from ordinary days to major life events. Slowly, the awkwardness disappeared. Before Emily left that evening, she stood near the door and looked back at Daniel. "Would you mind if I came again tomorrow?" Daniel smiled. "Only if you order breakfast?" Emily laughed. "I know what I'm ordering." The next morning, she returned. Then she came the day after that. Soon, Emily became a regular again. But this time, she was no longer simply a customer. She and Daniel began taking walks after closing time, talking about their lives and the future they had once imagined. Their relationship developed slowly, without pressure. They understood that they could not recover 10 lost years overnight, but they could choose not to lose another day. One evening, Daniel finally asked Emily why she had really come back. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "I came back because I realized something," she said. "There are people you meet once and forget. Then there are people who quietly become part of who you are. You were that person for me." Daniel reached for her hand. Emily continued, "I didn't come back because I remembered the diner. I came back because I remembered the way you made me feel when I was sitting at that table. Safe, seen, important." Daniel smiled. "And I remembered your order," he said. Emily laughed. "Apparently that's your superpower." They both laughed. Months later, Daniel placed a small framed photograph on the wall beside Emily's old table. It showed the two of them sitting together, smiling over breakfast. Beneath it was a simple handwritten sign. "Some people come back when the heart finally finds the courage." Emily continued ordering the same breakfast every morning. 2 scrambled eggs, crispy toast, strawberry jam, coffee with 2 sugars. But now Daniel no longer served it to a woman he secretly loved. He served it to the woman who had finally returned. And this time, when Emily finished her coffee, she did not walk away. She stayed. And Daniel finally understood that some stories do not end when people leave. Sometimes they simply wait 10 years for the right moment to begin again.